Chapter 21. Fosco Knows His Way Around. Inspector Holmes stared into his Guinness, feeling frustrated. At any other time, the sight of it would have cheered him, but not here. This was what you might call a duty Guinness, which spoiled any enjoyment of it. Here, of all places, in this god-forsaken dump Glenkill. Here at this stupid sheep contest, jammed in between tourists and the locals in festive mood. He didn't like the atmosphere. Relaxation was all very well, but the people here were too relaxed by half, although probably it just seemed that way to him because he wasn't having fun himself. He never ought to have joined the police, not with a name like his. They had a Watson in Galway, and no one ever left him in peace either. But Holmes? Stupid remarks were the least of it. All the most hopeless cases landed on his desk, with stupid remarks. It wasn't his fault that he had the worst success rate in the entire country and no prospect of improving it. Not with cases like this one. George Glynn. Right. At the start, he'd known. If it wasn't the family who did it, I'll never find out the truth. The family consisted of that pretty plump redhead, who, of course, had an alibi. Then all that stuff about the legacies. He had made up his mind just to arrest the heirs. Better than no arrest at all, he told himself. He could always let them go again later. But now, he could hardly arrest a flock of sheep. To be honest, by now he hated the sight of sheep. So, of course, the smartest sheep in Glenkill contest was no place for him. A wooden platform had been erected in the middle of the big hall in the Mad Boar. No steps leading up to it, only ramps. All for those animals. Behind it stood the shepherds with their champion sheep, so worked up that it was hard to say which of them was giving off the most penetrating stink. Or perhaps that was the tourists. Many of them had cycled here in the summer heat, and you could smell that, naturally. What was he doing here? Did he expect the murderer to give himself away while under the influence? Did he expect the sheep to supply the crucial clue? No, really. He just didn't want to be back in the office with a filing cabinet full of unsolved cases. Better to go on investigating a little longer. Now all was quiet. Quieter, anyway. Of course, the sheep were still bleating merrily away. Not particularly smart of them. A thin man climbed up on the platform. If that was the landlord, it didn't say much for the food in this place. The inspector would sooner have bought a meal from the fat man in the wheelchair. Hadn't the pair of them been among those who found the body? Yes, right. Baxter and Rackham. Taciturn fellow, that Baxter, he thought when he questioned him. But now the landlord was holding forth to the spectators for minutes on end. St. Patrick, Yeats and Swift, tradition, tradition, Glenkill's pride and its sheep, enough to make you sick, and he'd finished his Guinness. At last the skinny landlord had finished, and the contest began. Now it was really quiet. Even the sheep had stopped bleating. In the midst of this silence, a knock on the front door was heard. A minute ago, it wouldn't have had the faintest effect, but now all eyes went to the door. There didn't seem much point in knocking on the door of a pub, but no one in the hall moved. More knocking. In fact, it really sounded more like someone thumping on the door with a hard object. Only at the third knock did the man with the big nose take pity on whoever was knocking. He'd talk to him too. Father something or other, the parish priest. The priest went to the door and opened it, smiling. Only priests knew how to smile that way. He'd never seen a smile like it on anyone else's face. But even as the inspector was thinking this, the holy smile slipped, froze, twisted in amazement. The priest's horrified face stared at what was waiting for him outside. When the door finally opened, they felt like running away again. They'd never have thought there were so many people in the world. More than had come to their meadow, even more than had come to the lime tree. And the stink! The smells of individual humans had merged into a vast collective aroma, greasy and smoky, pungent, rancid, monstrously alien. The stink settled like oil around their nostrils, depriving them of the ability to scent anything. In addition, dense cigarette smoke lay like fog over the human faces above them. Its acrid smell drifted into the sheep's faces and made tears come to their eyes. They couldn't rely on their hearing anymore either. It was as if some strange veil had come down over them. Somewhere music was playing, muted as if by the leaves of a hedge, and a few feet were tapping under the pub benches. Nothing else. The people stared at them in silence. God, after opening the door, had taken a couple of steps back, his jaw dropping right open, then collapsed into a chair and was now clutching his chest. Othello took a step forwards into the middle of the narrow aisle between the row of tables. The others kept close behind him. They would all have preferred to race away from this dreadful cavern at top speed, but it was the only thing they could think of to do. At first, all the sheep had wanted to be in the smartest sheep in Glenkill contest, but most of the flock had stayed behind after the vote finally went to just 4 sheep: Miss Maple, Mopple the Whale, Zora, and Othello. By this time, fear had obliterated all pride and anticipation in Mopple, in Zora, even in Miss Maple. Othello was their lead ram. All they could do now was let him lead them. Head held high, he strode past the rows of tables, showing not the slightest sign of fear. Right behind him came Zora, then Miss Maple, and bringing up the rear, stout and nervous, Mopple the Whale, with the cloth firmly held between his clenched teeth. That stinking rag was their most important stage prop. When they had gone halfway into the hall, one of the humans shouted something, and an infernal racket broke out. The human beings were clapping their hands, shouting and roaring. The sheep moved even closer together, pushed along by Mopple the Whale, whose vulnerable position had filled him with panic. Mopple's head was now resting on Maple's rear end, Maple's on Zora's, and Zora was pushed right up to Othello. "What's that?" she whispered in fright. "Applause," said Othello calmly. "It means they like us." "That noise?" asked Zora, but Othello had already moved on, and Mopple was shoving Zora and Maple from behind. The clapping and shouting didn't stop. It pursued them right through the hall, and when Othello finally led them up onto the platform, it became unbearable. The black ram stopped and turned to the human beings. The sheep finally had a bit of room, but they were suddenly bathed in dazzling light. Mopple, Maple, and Zora took their chance to get Othello between them and the human hordes again. Shoulder to shoulder, they trotted round and stood in close formation behind him. Othello bowed his head down to the floor 3 times. "I wish they'd stop it," said Mopple indistinctly through the cloth held in his teeth. "Make them stop it." But Othello did nothing at all. He just stood there, looking calmly out over the sea of human heads. The other sheep peered uneasily to all sides. There was a second ramp at the back of the platform, which led down to a corner where the other sheep and their shepherds were waiting. It looked calm and peaceful, dark and safe. That was where they wanted to be. Othello showed no sign of moving yet. He was waiting for something. Gradually, the volume of noise decreased, and then it died away altogether. Othello got up on his hind legs. The noise began again, louder than ever. The humans were roaring. "See," said Othello, without turning round. "It's dead easy. When we do something, they make noise. When we don't do anything, they don't make noise." "Then we'd better not do anything," said Mopple the Whale. "It's not at all dangerous," said Othello, when he was down on all 4 legs again. "They're the audience." So saying, he turned and led his mini flock down the second ramp and into the corner with the other sheep. There was a low fence around this corner with a small gate in it. Othello opened the gate with his front hoof, led his sheep through it, and closed the gate with his nose. The other sheep were tied up to the fence. Their shepherds were sitting at a table in the middle of the fenced area, staring open-mouthed at the newcomers. "You are right," Zora whispered to Miss Maple. People really do pay a lot of attention to sheep here." They felt better again in the company of other sheep. Othello led them to a quiet place between a stout gray ram and a brown ewe. They waited to see what would happen next. The applause had gradually turned to an excited murmur. Compared with the racket just now, it was almost refreshing. A strange man wearing glasses pushed his way through all the humans crowding curiously around the fenced-off shepherd's corner. When the shepherds saw him, they mobbed him. "Against all the rules!" shouted one. "Why didn't anyone tell us? Why aren't they listed on the program? Get them out of here at once!" "What's the idea? You told us no one could enter more than one sheep. If I'd known, I could have brought along Peggy and Molly and Sue. Then you'd have seen something." "They haven't been entered." The bespectacled man smiled. "To be honest, I haven't the faintest notion where they come from, or where their shepherd is." The shepherds looked at each other in silence. Then one of them said, "Their shepherd won't be coming." "How can you be so sure?" asked the bespectacled man. "He's dead," said the shepherd. "Those are George Glenn's sheep." "Oh," the bespectacled man looked confused. "They should be thrown out," shouted a sturdy, red-faced farmer. The sheep were horrified. All that trouble just to be chased away from the pub when they were so close to achieving their aim. "It's not that simple," said the bespectacled man. "Don't you hear the audience? The tourists. They like those sheep. If we turn them out, what do you think will happen?" "Oh, I couldn't care less," growled one of the shepherds. "Rules are rules." "No," the bespectacled man shook his head. "Why should we deprive the audience of its fun?" "Fun?" shouted the red-faced farmer angrily. "Look, we'll let them perform outside the contest," said the bespectacled man soothingly. "At the end, when no one's really watching anymore." The shepherds sat down at their table again in a bad temper, giving George's sheep black looks. Wide-eyed, Mopple, Maple, and Zora watched the strange things going on around them. Children's hands pushed through the fence, offering them sweets, bread, cake, even ice cream. Not even Mopple dreamed of touching this father. For the first time in his life, he had no appetite. Perhaps it was also because the rag he had put down on the straw beside him was still giving off its horrible smell. The music was very loud now. This time it didn't come from a small gray radio set, but from a troop of people who had marched up on the platform and were doing things with a strange set of tools. The music made the sheep's hearts beat faster, as if they were galloping. The human beings gawping around the fence had taken out small box things and were aiming flashes of lightning at the sheep. Maple blinked. She was the cleverest sheep in all Glen Hill, but at that moment she made up her mind that no one must ever find it out. In search of help, Maple, Zora, and Mopple looked round at the other sheep. The brown ewe on their right was nervously munching a piece of straw. Maple was about to ask her a question when she noticed the stout gray ram scrutinizing her. "You lot aren't particularly clever," said the ram, his eyes glittering. "Just walking in here as if it were summer pasture. Taking part in this contest at all, I wouldn't call that smart." He winked at her mischievously. "The others are taking part too," said Mopple the whale. "The others aren't particularly smart either," said the stranger. The two rams looked hard at each other. Mopple had never before met a sheep who was fatter than him. He immediately felt respect for the gray ram. "You're taking part yourself," said Miss Maple, offended. After all, coming to the smartest sheep in Glen Hill contest had been her idea. "So I suppose that means you're not particularly clever either." "Wrong," said the gray ram. "I am Fosco. All the others are here for the first time. They've no idea what's coming to them, except for the dappled ram there. He's been competing as long as I have."
but he has no idea either. He forgets the whole thing again every year. It would be crazy to take part a second time.
Oh, you're crazy, are you? Asked Miss Maple.
Wrong,
Said Fosco.
I am Fosco. The others take part, I win.
Maple was about to ask another question when the music stopped. The bespectacled man had climbed up on the wooden platform. Ladies and gentlemen,
Here we are at last. The traditional smartest sheep in Glenkill contest will open in a few minutes' time. One by one, the cleverest sheep in Glenkill will do their tricks for you. Then you will use your voting papers to decide on the winner. And of course, there's a prize to be won as well. For you, it will be a week of culinary lamb specialties at the Mad Boar. For the sheep, well, it will be the same.
the human beings roared their approval.
Only joking, the bespectacled man went on. Of course, the smartest sheep in Glengill doesn't go under the knife itself. There's a pint of Guinness and a wreath of shamrock waiting for the winner. Then it will go on tour and show off its skills in all the pubs of Ballyshannon, Bundoran, and Ballintra.
The bespectacled man didn't do any spectacular tricks, but he was applauded all the same.
The shepherd will receive a small mark of appreciation to the value of €200. So let's have a round of applause, please. Oh, I now declare the smartest sheep in Glenkill contest open.
The humans in the hall obediently made a lot of noise. Othello glared at the bespectacled man. Zora flapped her ears, and Mopple swallowed. The remark about lamb specialties had left a nasty taste behind. Fosco winked at them.
He says that every time. Take a look at me. Would you say I look like a lamb specialty? Off we go, announced the bespectacled man. Let's hear it for Jim O'Connor and Smarty. Oh, wow, chuckled Fosco. He's going first. Just watch this.
The sheep craned their necks. The red-faced farmer had stood up and was leading the dappled ram to the platform by his halter. Gradually, the audience fell silent. The farmer bowed to them.
Smarty, the only footballing sheep in the world,
he said. He put a mottled black and white ball down on the floor in front of Smarty. Fosco turned to George's sheep.
He's supposed to nudge the ball along with his hoof. I'm only telling you because you'd never guess it from his act.
Smarty conscientiously sniffed the ball all over. Then he rubbed his head on one foreleg. The farmer looked at him with an expression showing that he was perfectly confident of the victory. Now Smarty swung his foreleg back and forth and stared at the ball again, as if he'd just seen it for the first time. He was in no hurry. A few whistles could be heard from the audience. The farmer was getting impatient. He went over to Smarty and pushed the ball a little too hard with his own foot, sending it rolling over the platform. Smarty trotted after it and tried to bite it. In doing so, he only pushed the ball further on. The ball bounced off the platform, and without a moment's hesitation, Smarty jumped off after it, landing on top of the first of the tables where spectators were sitting. Glasses clinked, and the humans at the table bleated in protest. The sheep rolled their eyes at such nonsense. Look at him, chuckled Fosco. He's been doing the same silly trick here for years. The only bigger fool in his flock is the farmer himself. Smarty, the only footballing sheep in the world, earned only half-hearted applause. The bespectacled man smiled apologetically as he climbed up on the stage again. Simon Foster and Einstein defending his title, he announced. That's me, said Fosco. They think my name is Einstein. There was a conspiratorial twinkle in his little eyes, as if being called by the wrong name was a particularly clever move on his part. Fosco's farmer was tall and strong, and even stouter than Fosco. He was holding a bag in one hand and his other hand was in his pocket. The two of them walked calmly out on stage. For his girth, Fosco was surprisingly light on his hooves. The farmer didn't say a single word. He took a bottle of Guinness and a glass out of his bag, poured the Guinness into the glass, and put it down on the floor in front of Fosco. Fosco took the glass in his teeth and raised it. Next, he tipped his head back and gulped down the contents of the glass. Applause! Fosco put the glass neatly back on the floor again. The farmer took a second bottle out of the bag. He still hadn't taken his other hand out of his trouser pocket. A third bottle followed. The humans roared their approval. At the fourth bottle, they rose from the benches chanting, "Einstein! Einstein!" over and over again in chorus. The farmer himself, still working one-handed, drank the fifth bottle. Then he took his other hand out of his pocket and waved to the audience with both hands. Amidst thunderous applause, sheep and shepherd marched back into the corner. The other shepherds looked enviously at them. Fosco was tethered next to George's sheep, and the farmer sat down again. "So that's how you win?" asked Miss Maple. "By drinking?"
"Wrong," said Fosco. "By drinking Guinness from a glass. That's what they all do themselves. So of course they're convinced it's the cleverest thing anyone can do. That's why I win. Every time."
"But it's not a difficult thing to do," said Zora. Fosco was unmoved.
"That just shows how smart I am. Why would I do something difficult when I can win with something easy?"
"And why do you want to win?"
asked Mopple, convinced by now that they could really learn a lot from Fosco.
"For the Guinness, of course," said Fosco. "Didn't you hear? The winner gets a Guinness. And then he does his trick again in the other pubs, and he gets more Guinness. And then, of course, there are the weeks of training before the contest."
His eyes were shining. Next came Jeremy Tip and Wild Rose. George's sheep craned their necks again curiously, but Fosco shook his head.
"Nothing worth mentioning," he said. "They put the good turns on first this time. You can forget the rest of it. You might as well not watch any more."
But the sheep did watch. Wild Rose ran around in circles and changed direction when the shepherd whistled. Another sheep jumped clumsily over small obstacles. A massive ram kept nodding his head when his shepherd gave him a signal. At another signal, he bleated. His shepherd talked to him all the time. Surprisingly, this act went down well. Saddest of all was the performance of the brown ewe, who didn't even have a name. Once on stage, she was so frightened that she lost her sense of direction and couldn't run through the little obstacle course that her shepherd had set up. She stood still in the middle of the platform. When the shepherd hit her with a stick, the brown ewe raced across the stage in panic and fell off the other side. A few people clapped even at this. Fosco remained grimly silent. The bespectacled man came up on the platform again.
"And now, ladies and gentlemen, our surprise guests, Peggy, Polly, Samson, and Black Satan."
"He's gone and thought up wrong names for us," bleated Zora indignantly. Othello snorted too.
"Do I look like a donkey?"
"Never mind," said Miss Maple. "Here we go. Just do everything the way we discussed it, and remember what Melmoth taught us." And now George Glenn's sheep had trotted up onto the platform into the dazzling light to ensure that justice got out at last. The people in the hall were looking expectantly at them. The babble of voices slowly subsided into a muted murmur. At last it was quiet enough in the room for the sheep to hear their own breathing again. Then, suddenly, there was a loud bang. A chair had fallen over. Next moment, a door slammed. The humans turned their heads in surprise. A murmur ran through the hall. "What was that then?"
Father William, someone replied. No idea what's the matter. He just shot out of the door as if the devil himself were after him.
Although the others hadn't noticed, a queasy feeling was spreading between Othello's horns. Was it the audience? He sensed all eyes on him like ticks in his fleece, just the way he had felt them the first time Lucifer Smithy dragged him into a circus ring. Othello waited for the voice in his head. It would say something soothing, or something provocative, or something to make him think. Anyway, the voice would send the queasy feeling away. But Othello heard nothing. He listened to his front right horn. He listened to his front left horn. He listened to his back left horn, and finally to his right back horn. Nothing at all. Othello was so surprised that he stopped still. The voice had gone away. For the first time, he was alone. Shivers ran through his fleece. Somewhere among all those spectators, panic lay in wait for him. But just as it was about to leap on Othello, he felt a gentle nudge against his hindquarters. It was Zora's velvety nose reminding him to go on walking as he pulled himself together. After all, he had defeated the dog in the end. He had defeated many dogs. He had faced God, and God had ran away from him. He was now the lead ram, and today, on this special day, he was death. Sometimes being alone is an advantage, Othello thought, and he set his black hooves firmly on the platform. Zora was relieved. After that moment's hesitation, Othello had started moving again. At last, the long wait had started her thinking, and today, on stage at the Smartest Sheep in Glenhill contest, Zora wanted, just for once, to think as little as possible. But it was too late. Zora thought of what the man with the glasses had said. Lamb specialties. She thought of the strange ram. All flesh was grass. They grazed sheep's flesh like grass. Meat was right. That was why they'd laughed. That was why there was the butcher. Zora looked at all the faces of humans who wanted to win the lamb specialties. She saw an abyss that had always been there, right in front of her, although she had never guessed at its existence. The seagulls were silent. For the first time in her life, Zora felt dizzy. She peered in all directions. Then she saw a small, perfect cloud sheep floating in the air a few paces away from her. It had risen from the pipe being smoked by a young man in the second row. Zora knew that it wasn't really a cloud sheep, but it reminded her of what the abyss was there for. The abyss was there to be overcome. Sure-footed, she climbed up on the platform behind Othello. Zora was the shepherd today. Miss Maple trotted along behind Zora and Othello, in good spirits but feeling the tension to the tip of every hair in her fleece. It was her plan. Would the human beings understand the show they were putting on for them? The sheep had understood it, all of them, the whole flock. Some had even galloped up the hill in a fright during rehearsals because the act thought up by Miss Maple and the others had seemed so real. Maple thought optimistically that human beings on their good days weren't much dimmer than sheep, or at least not much dimmer than dim sheep. But would the humans believe them? And if so, then what would happen? Miss Maple looked forward to seeing what justice looked like. She stepped up onto the wooden boards and blinked fearlessly down at the spectators. Miss Maple was the wolf. Mopple the whale trotted after the others with the rag between his teeth again, and taking rather short breaths. The smell of the rag was the reason they had to be short, quick breaths. Apart from that, Mopple was feeling surprisingly good. He knew what he had to do. He had remembered everything. When he made his entrance, even the dimmest sheep in the meadow had realized what part Maple was playing, who the murderer was. Horns held confidently high, hooves treading carefully, Mopple stepped up on stage and froze. For there in the front row, only a few paces away, and with his hands clamped on the arms of his wheelchair, sat the butcher.